This is a great way to frame the problem of decentralized machine learning. And the best way to incentivize it is through crypto. So I work on the Substrate side a little bit. I work on the Python side a little bit.
What's it like working with Substrate? Why is this the right choice for the network?
It's not crypto for the sake of crypto. It's crypto for the sake of perpetuating AI.
The launch team wishes you good luck and Godspeed.
Space Monkeys blasting off with Cameron Fairchild, who's a core developer at the Opentensor Foundation, responsible for building Bittensor. Now, it's a very interesting time because we're about to fly to Bangkok for the Sub-Zero conference, and although Bittensor is not part of the Polkadot ecosystem, they are built on the Substrate Framework. Cameron, thanks very much for coming on the show. Welcome to Space Monkeys.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's very cool that we actually live so close together.
It's a great coincidence.
It's a high concentration of high IQ in a single place.
Yeah, I think a lot of the best crypto people are from Canada.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I mean, Vitalik not from Canada, but like was in Canada.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, many more as well.
You are a core developer for Opentensor?
So I started at the Opentensor Foundation technically in May 2022.
Okay.
But in around November 2021, when they launched, I started contributing to the open source part of it.
Oh, yeah.
And then, I was in school doing my bachelor's, so I figured, why don't I start as like an intern there? That'd be pretty sick, right? Because I already liked the project, might as well, start being paid to contribute to it.
Yeah, totally.
Right, so that was pretty great.
So you're just contributing out of interest and they saw what you were doing and said, hey, come on in and work for us?
Yeah, exactly. I was mining on the network when they relaunched in November of 2021. And then I noticed a few bugs, so I started fixing them. And then they were like, oh yeah, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how do you describe what Bittensor, the mission of Bittensor, the purpose of Bittensor is to other people who you're trying to get involved?
Yeah, so we like to use a comparison of Bitcoin to Bittensor.
Yeah.
And that might seem a bit presumptuous, but the idea is Bitcoin was able to orchestrate a bunch of people to start contributing to their network through, creating different software and building different hardware just to do this the SHA-256 hash over and over and over, right? Yeah. And it's through that it's become arguably the world's largest supercomputer effectively, right? But it's not like doing anything useful, right? It's just making the SHA hash, right? Which, secures their network, but you can't use that for anything, right? That product or that commodity, right, is not useful in and of itself. Sure. It's just useful for that purpose. So Bittensor hopes to frame like machine learning or other problems in the same way as that, where you can get people to go and do that problem in a decentralized fashion and get rewarded for it. Okay. Right? So kind of like a proof of useful work, right? Huh. And one of the main framings of it is to solve the problem of decentralized machine learning or decentralized AI. Right, so if you can get people to train models, to serve models, like do inference on them in a decentralized fashion, you can then reward them with TAO, for instance, right? And then now you have everybody contributing their computation, their research skills, their programming skills, maybe their infrastructure skills to bring down cost, right? Yeah. All of these things and all of these skills are incentivized through the reward. Right, in the same way that Bitcoin incentivizes people to just do the SHA hash faster, we incentivize people to contribute to machine intelligence better.
That's crazy. That's a complex spectrum of contributions people can make.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't really, and we don't care, right? The Bittensor network does not care what you do to do it better. Okay. You just do it better. Right? There's nothing written into the chain saying you must have this rigid structure of how you contribute this machine intelligence or how you make it better, how you innovate, right? Okay. All of that is completely abstracted away.
So are all nodes in the network, are they all similar to each other? Or are there different types of nodes doing different types of tasks?
Yeah, so we separate into this distinction of subnets.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right.
Where a subnet is like this one task that everybody does, because the way we give people rewards, right, the way we reward them in TAO, right, we mint new TAO to them, is we do it in a kind of a ranked fashion, right? So it's a competitive ranking of all the members, all the miners participating on the network. And to rank them against each other, it's hard to do that when there's multiple tasks they're each doing. So if you don't want to do just one task, say, text inference from say ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
if you don't want to just have that, you want to get them to do image generation, whatever, it's hard to compare an image generation output to a text output in a way
Gotcha.
that's kind of meaningful, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So we separate those tasks into what we call subnets, right? And then each subnet is its own task and has its own rankings, and everybody's incentivized based on that ranking and that specific task.
So the first subnet is kind of about the...
We defined something called the root network, is
Yeah,
what we
yeah.
called it. And this came after subnets were introduced. So
Okay.
originally it was just one subnet. They didn't really have the notion of subnet defined yet.
Sure.
Right? But that was what subnet 1 is.
Okay.
Right? And that was the core offering of let's have an LLM produce a text output, and the best LLM is the one that gets weighted the most, and they get the most TAO, right?
Gotcha.
And that's still living on, but that's in its own subnet now.
Yeah.
Where now there's other tasks.
Right.
And to distribute these emissions among all of those tasks, we use something called the root network, which isn't really a network in itself. It's more of just an abstraction for voting, right? So
Okay.
we allow all the validators on the network who actually validate and rank these miners to then say, well, we like this task more than this other task, so we're going to say it should get more TAO than the other one based on every block, and then all the people who are doing that, all the validators, come into a consensus based on how much stake they're holding and how much stake is delegated to them to decide how the emissions are distributed.
Whoa. So who sets up the subnets initially?
Yeah, so originally the first subnet was set up by the Opentensor Foundation, but
Sure.
that's since been spun off to a different company who's still operating it. But
Okay.
right now, it's a permissionless exercise to set up a subnet. You don't have to ask the Opentensor Foundation, you have to ask anyone. You just have to have enough TAO to lock it on the network and register a new subnet, and you just start being the largest validator,
Yeah.
and that's it, right?
I saw recently like a subnet just opened for protein folding or something like that.
Yeah, so actually that same company
Yeah.
is working on multiple subnets, and another one of their offerings is protein folding.
Sure.
So the same idea is like fold at home, doing harnessing this decentralized compute, everyone donating their GPU power.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. They're harnessing that same thing, but rewarding people for it. Right. I think Banano, if you've heard of it, is like it's kind of a fork on Nano.
Okay.
Right. So they decided they would reward people for the same thing, but that's more of a trustful situation where you can't guarantee that those people are actually rewarded.
Yeah,
right?
okay.
On this subnet, those people are rewarded for how well they do based on
Cool.
the validator's evaluation of them. Right? You don't have to trust a central entity like the Banano Foundation to actually give people that amount.
That's so interesting. And something like protein folding obviously has a real world purpose and can yield like a real business and real use cases.
Yeah,
Is
exactly.
the idea that the value generated from doing something like folding proteins would somehow pay for the TAO emitted, or how does that economy get closed?
Yeah, that's typically the idea, is that instead of just evaluating people on a task, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And that being the only thing you're doing, you need to make that useful work that you're getting a proof of, that you're ranking. You need to make it actually useful.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So a thing that a lot of validators and a lot of subnets do when they design the subnet incentive is they work in a way that you can get an organic user request and actually kind of sneak it in there, right? So like a miner who's getting requests from a validator, who's getting evaluated on how good they are, right? They'll probably get a lot of synthetic, fake requests that are coming from the validator purely to evaluate them on how well they're doing.
Sure.
But sometimes a validator can sneak in a user request, somebody actually trying to use the network, right? They'll sneak that in, and you don't know if it's a user request or not. You will think you're being evaluated, right? So
Okay.
you're going to respond as best you can, just like
yeah.
you always have been, just so that you get a high ranking out of it. You don't know if that's going to be your ranking or not. You just know you should do your best because you can't tell.
So it's a pretty active community of validators, of workers. Are there a lot of people actually using this useful work so far, or is this client base that we're still building up, or user base we're still building up?
I would say we're still building it up, but there is a lot of active users on a couple subnets.
Yeah.
I don't have the exact numbers,
Sure,
but
sure.
like the LLM subnet, the subnet 1, that has that's being directed through this platform called Corchel or Corcel. They're run by this explorer called TAOstats. So they branched off to doing API offerings where they basically proxy your requests, just like I was mentioning. They proxy your requests through validators to miners,
Yeah.
and then give you something useful out of it. So they're trying to emulate the same kind of interface of like this LLM prompting for chat. They also do image generation
Sure.
and a bunch of other offerings like that. And they also offer like an enterprise API. So you have a certain amount of bandwidth, and they price it for that, right? And that's all priced in like fiat, right? So they're getting revenue through that, right? And that's the same kind of model that we would expect other validators to take on.
I know the whole framing of Bittensor is really through this this AI vision, but it kind of feels a little bit like the whole network is, I don't know, almost more of like a DePIN or something. It's like coordinating useful compute across like multiple different initiatives.
Yeah, we see that framed that way a lot. Like there's this guy, Sami, I don't know, it's like Sami Kassab from Masari.
Oh, yeah.
Or previously Masari. Now he's, fully into the network, working on his own team, doing stuff.
Nice.
And he was I think he was the guy who coined the term DePIN in crypto.
Okay,
right?
okay.
And he's super into the concept of Bittensor because it relates really well to that concept of DePIN and what makes DePIN so great, right?
Sure.
Is that actual useful, the usefulness of the work that miners are doing, right? And we have subnets that do compute, like just compute, right?
Sure.
Like not all of them obviously do that, and it's some of them rely on it, right? Mm-hmm. But there are ones that just do compute, right? I forget the subnet number, but there's one running right now. It's called Celium, like my Celium with the MY.
Oh yeah.
And they're doing a similar offering to if you've heard of RunPod, right?
No.
Probably not. It's like a VPS provider that's fairly cheap, and the reason it's pretty cheap is because they're able to get GPUs from like providers that are less big, they're not Google, right?
Sure.
They're not Amazon, right? They're not AWS, but they're able to offer these GPUs in a good enough uptime that they can make it much cheaper, right?
Yeah.
And they are much cheaper, and it's great. It works really well, right?
Sure.
Because they're competing with the big guys, right? They have to be cheaper. But we see an even bigger exaggeration of that when we make it just a market of individuals, right?
Sure.
These decentralized individuals all running miners on the Bittensor network, just serving their compute, saying, I have these GPUs I want to offer people to rent. They're able to do that at an even more reduced cost, because say they're running it in like whatever data center, or they're running it at their house, whatever the case is, right? They're able to cut those costs, right? Because it might just be just them, it might be whatever, but they're able to find things, just through their efforts all the time, right?
Yeah.
And they're constantly in competition, whereas incumbents like Google and Amazon don't have to do that, right? They can get kind of lazy in their in their methods.
Yeah, it really is like kind of like decentralized cloud compute within certain verticals or something like that.
Yeah, a lot like that. But a good point that I like to make is it's not the compute that's important in most of the subnets. Like, of course, the ones that are specifically like compute subnets, that's the most important part.
Okay.
But ones like the machine intelligence ones, right? Like the ones that serve, image generation, the ones that do the text inference, those ones are mainly about incentivizing the intelligence and the skills of the people who are doing the mining.
The product, the outcome.
The outcome, yes. Because the evaluation has nothing to do with how you're doing it. It's only what you output. Right? So it doesn't matter how you do it, right?
Okay.
As long as you're better than everybody else.
Are models competing?
The models themselves don't compete, but their outputs are in competition when they get ranked, right?
Gotcha.
So they're ranked against each other, and the reward is distributed, against everybody in a competitive fashion.
What's the ethos of decentralization at the Opentensor Foundation in the community? Is it important? Is it more about efficiency and output? What's your view?
Yeah, so my personal view is decentralization's an incredibly important thing, especially in the context of AI. Because as we see more and more, these things are created and then they're harnessed to do things that are for the benefit of everybody, right?
Yeah.
And not only that, but these things aren't available to everybody at the same capacity, right? If you want this text model that's super amazing, you're paying this ChatGPT subscription, right?
Sure.
There's no public good coming of Microsoft and OpenAI owning all this stuff and keeping everybody out of it.
Sure.
Right. Whereas there are Bittensor subnets that are framed in this public good mindset, right? Like there's a pre-training subnet that just gives the best reward to the person who has the best pre-trained model, and all those weights are fully public, right? Whereas OpenAI wouldn't do that, right?
No, right.
That would kill their product, right? That would kill their business model, right?
Yeah.
But Bittensor has no such business model. If we want to incentivize that kind of creation of intelligence, we do. And we can.
That's so awesome. So what are you working on lately as a core dev?
So as a core dev, I don't do necessarily one thing.
Sure.
I'm on both the Python client team and also a bit on the chain team, right, which works on Substrate. As I'm sure a lot of people are familiar listening in. So I work on the Substrate side a little bit. I work on the Python side a little bit. And the Python side is mainly about the client with interacting with the chain, as well as people just using tooling for various things when they're running their subnets.
What's it like working with Substrate? Why is this the right choice for the network, or is it more of like a legacy situation?
I think part of the reason why it's so great is the modularity and also the open ecosystem of like all this tooling, all these palettes, right? It's such a great system to be able to say, well, like this is especially relevant to now, is if we want this new feature of EVM compatibility, right?
Yeah.
There's already a frontier palette written by somebody else.
Yeah.
Right? We just have to take that, adapt it in the way we want, and suddenly it's in the network, right? It's that easy. It's very quick. There's so many people working on so many different aspects of a blockchain, and it also abstracts out that part for us, right? Like the founders weren't crypto people, right?
Oh.
They have like no like formal like training in that area.
Okay,
right?
interesting.
They're machine learning people, right?
Okay.
And they thought, this is a great way to frame the problem of decentralized machine learning. And the best way to incentivize it is through crypto.
Okay.
Right? It's not crypto for the sake of crypto. It's crypto for the sake of perpetuating AI. Right?
Yes, got you.
Exactly.
Totally.
It's just the incentive layer.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And was it a tough learning curve to get into Substrate?
To get into Substrate, I mean, there's some things still.
Okay,
there's something
really?
still. It's like these docs are lacking.
The docs are lacking. Okay,
or not that they're lacking. I can't find which ones I need.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Maybe I should go to the Polkadot Blockchain Academy. Maybe
Sure.
maybe I should do that and learn from there. Maybe
you'd have a
that's
good
all
time.
I'm missing out on.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I don't know, but
All you have to do is put aside your life for a few weeks and go to the academy. Yeah.
Right? but for the most part, it's pretty great. Like there are docs, right? There are things. People do answer you on dev channels occasionally. But if there's ever something that's really like difficult, we've gotten support from like Parity and Web3 and all that. So
Cool.
it's not like we're without any support at all.
Yeah.
Right on it, even though it is fully open source and like doing whatever we want with it. Mm-hmm. Right, we still do get support, which is great.
That's cool. From your point of view, what was the reason to spin out a Polkadot? My understanding was like you guys just wanted to rip things up and fuck around.
Of not going in with the parachain slot.
Yeah.
So originally we wanted to do it because of the interoperability, right? We were able to say like, well, here's, people want to take TAO and they want to move it to another chain for, what have you, right?
Oh, okay, interesting.
But there's no trustless way to do that unless we become a parachain, right?
Yeah.
So, we had this parachain set up and we would have been able to do it fairly easily because we're built on Substrate.
Yeah.
Right. But, as we were doing it, there were just issues with starting the slot, right? Again, a lack of
you guys were pretty early
great documentation and stuff like that, right? And there's these things that still weren't clear. I think like I spoke with somebody recently on the mistakes we had made, and there was a clear way to do it the way we wanted, but back when we encountered it, it sounded like we had to just go through governance of the Polkadot chain itself to unblock ourselves development-wise, right?
I see.
And we're very fast-moving in our development, right? So it's kind of hard getting blocked by just governance things, right?
Totally.
Which is, so that makes it difficult, right? But yeah, I mean, it's something like I personally would be open to doing again, but I'm not speaking for the foundation at all.
No, yeah.
The foundation is still we're still exploring, what the best solution is.
Yeah.
Right now we're looking at the frontier palette doing EVM. Right. But, things are open, tentatively, right? It really depends on which way we go.
We don't have parachain slots anymore, right?
Yeah. I heard you're moving to Jam, is it?
No, not yet. No, right now, parachain slots are done.
Yeah.
Now it's just like pay-as-you-go access to...
Oh, interesting. Okay,
yeah, it's kind of cool. We're calling it core time.
Core time.
Yeah, you want time on a Polkadot core.
Yeah.
And then the interop comes with it.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
That's also part of why we chose Substrate is like instead of doing something with EVM and being on top of another layer, like operating on another blockchain just requires so much cost, right?
I know.
It's far better to do this solo chain thing, right? Because our blockchain is huge, right? It's multiple terabytes. I forget what rate it's growing at now, but at one point it was like almost a terabyte every couple of days.
Damn.
Which is crazy big, right?
Yeah.
And that would not that would not play out well if we had to pay for every single thing we put on chain.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we'll have to pay for it eventually, technically, right? Like in the sense that somebody has to host it, but we're not going to have to pay like a chain in their token for it, which is great.
Eventually, decentralizing the network, I mean, do you have this like massive cost ahead of you? Like,
Yeah, so right
how's
now,
that gonna work?
right now it's all proof of authority nodes, right?
Yeah.
So the POA nodes are running, and those are all run by the Opentensor Foundation right now. And we're very
Okay.
transparent about that.
Yeah.
We had made attempts to split that off, that fell through a bit, but right now we're in the process of planning for doing nominated proof of stake. Right.
Great.
So I guess a similar model to the way Polkadot does things
Yeah.
is you have people nominating just for the chain nodes itself, right? So we already have a proof of stake style system for the validator nodes, right? Which sounds confusing because validators we use in multiple senses.
Yeah, right.
The validators that I'm talking about, just now,
Okay.
are not the chain nodes, right? Like the chain validators. That is an apt term for them also.
Okay. Okay.
But we use validators to validate the machine intelligence or to validate the products being produced.
Sure.
We have those called validators as well, right? Those produce the rankings and submit them to the chain.
Different than
But
the
we have
validators who make the
different-
blockchain.
Exactly.
Yeah,
We have
got
different
you.
nodes that actually make the blocks.
Okay.
And those are run entirely by the foundation right now.
Gotcha.
So those are what we're looking to decentralize more.
Yeah.
The other validators are already decentralized. There's many different people running them right now.
Cool.
I think something
Yeah,
like
I got
20 right now.
Wow, so the chain itself is proof of authority.
Exactly.
Gotcha. We just had a proof of authority chain called Mythical Games.
I think I've heard.
Have you heard of it? Yeah.
A little bit.
They have like App Store games and stuff, and as far as like NFT sales volume go, they're like just under Solana right now.
Oh, wow.
It's huge, over 6 million active accounts and all this stuff. It's really
That's
wild.
crazy.
We just moved them from their proof of authority chain over to a slot.
Yeah.
They're one of the first ones to do such a thing, but now they're humming. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Decentralizing the producers of the blockchain is one thing, but one thing that we're facing pretty hard in Polkadot is decentralizing the social layer of the network as well. We're talking about like the people who actually govern the direction of that chain. Are you guys thinking about this at all yet?
Yeah, so we had made attempts at governance at some point. I think that's also the
Nice.
name of
Oh my god! Well, yeah.
But we had made an attempt at governance.
That's all you can
before.
do. Yeah.
And it's not totally flexible, right? So we're transitioning to this stage. Well, or I guess I will describe what we have right now.
Yeah.
Is the way emissions are distributed amongst the different subnets, like the different tasks happening, right? Is right now it's just a manual vote by the top validators, like not chain nodes, the validators who are doing the machine intelligence.
Yeah.
Those people vote using all the delegated stake they have from everybody who's delegated to them.
Okay.
And they vote based on, what weighting they think every task should get, every subnet should get, right?
Okay.
There's a consensus done over it, so it's not like you couldn't just say one to something and then it gets like a ton, right? There's some consensus applied across it. But for the most part, it's a manual vote, and what those people say is how the tokens are distributed, right?
Yeah, interesting.
So, obviously that model has, problems, right? You're going to get people just voting for the thing that they might own part of, right?
Sure.
Or they might get some sort of benefit from voting for, right?
Yeah.
It might not be what's best for the network, right? It might not be what's best overall. It might just, be some sort of, dare I say, racket, right?
Sure. Maybe people who can run machines don't have competence in other areas that might be important to the network.
Yeah. Exactly.
Marketing or something like that, or communications
right?
or something. Yeah.
And a lot of it, we've seen, is marketing, right? Right now is, subnets market to all the people making that decision, and the people who are best at marketing, not necessarily the people with the best product, are the ones who get weighted the highest, right? Which isn't great, right?
Yeah,
it's a bit political, right?
Yeah.
So we're moving to this
cool.
concept we call dynamic TAO, right? We changed it to RAO recently. RAO is this idea of voting kind of with stakes, right? So you have to have some sort of investment in your vote, right? Your vote comes at a slight risk or a slight advantage depending on when you put it in, and you're essentially buying into the performance of each subnet.
I see.
Right?
Okay.
We are offering a way to not have to participate in this dynamic nature, right? Which carries some level of risk.
Yeah.
But it will diminish the amount of benefit you might get otherwise, right? So these people who do participate will stand to benefit more, right? But they also stand to risk, right? Because right now what happens is you see these people voting erroneously effectively, right? Because there's no risk to them, right? And there's no direct benefit on, how well they vote, right? If they vote for something like very little, for something that's really great for the network, they don't like lose out, right? That's just an oversight. But if we want to accurately weigh things on how much value they produce, we need to make some sort of stakes to it, right? So what we're doing is effectively you swap in your TAO, you swap it in to a pool of, we call them alpha tokens, is just like the generic term.
Sure.
But they're effectively a representation of how much TAO you hold.
Okay.
And they fluctuate based on the supply and demand of that. Kind of like their own tokens.
So you basically have this open market with all these like sub-tokens.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a sub-token kind of. They're not tradable. You can't, or not tradable. They're not transferable.
Yeah.
Right? So you can't say I have like this sub-token and I want to switch it.
Interesting.
Right? You have to sell it directly into the pool, right, which is on the network. And that only sells back to TAO, right? And the whole idea is by buying into this pool, right, and by like investing your TAO in, right, you're giving a vote, but you're also getting a benefit for that vote.
Sure.
And you're also standing to lose from that vote, right? If people say, well, this isn't a great concept, or these people, got hacked, or not hacked, but like exploited, right? Somebody found a way around to game it, right?
Sure.
And then they got a bunch of emission for being the best, even though they weren't doing something that was the best, right? If they exploit it and you see like this team doesn't have as much value as I thought they did, right? People are going to leave and try to recoup what they put in, right? And then you see people leave. And if you don't do that, fast enough, if you're not constantly evaluating people for how well their project is going, how well their subnet's going, then you stand to lose, right? So you're now incentivized to actually care about your vote.
That's wild. TAO's kind of an interesting project because on one hand, it's a little bit of a darling of the crypto space, right? I think it's like constantly flirting with top 30 in market cap, which is just mind-blowing. But you're describing like these really complex structures to actually participate in building this important network. How many people do you think are actually like, at this level, actually like working together and, working through this trouble to move the network forward? Like what's that core community look like?
There's something like 20 validators right now, but we expect the amount of people who care are a lot more. There's one validator that started up recently.
20 validators competing for a nominated vote right now in the current system.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's more than that, but it's roughly that number.
Around there,
right? There's this one that popped up recently with this ethos of the same kind of idea as DTAO. We called this original implementation STAO for like, I think it was for staked TAO. Something like that. But basically the idea is instead of having these stakes, like these risks associated, you just were able to decide individually, right? So instead of having your delegate, like whoever you delegated your TAO to, instead of having them decide for you what the weight is, you would decide yourself. Right, so all these individuals were deciding, right?
Okay.
And the problem with that is we were seeing people not like fully participating, right? The same way people don't come out to vote in Polkadot governance, and you get like a lower turnout, and then you have whatever people who actually decided to show up decide everything for everybody else. We're having the same thing happen where people came in and voted, and now everybody else's vote is effectively under theirs, right? So we're moving to this to DTAO, and while we're in the process of doing that, somebody said, why don't we do this STAO thing now in a way that's still like it's trustful, so it's not like integrated into the chain, but it's still something that's better than what we have right now.
Sure.
So they implemented it themselves on kind of the validator client side. If you stake to their validator, you can submit a transaction or a signed message saying, I want to vote this way with my TAO on the different subnets, and they respect that, and they just incorporate that, and they come to like some sort of consensus. I'm not sure exactly the details of how they do the consensus, but they use that as their weighting, right? So they respect the individual delegator's wishes, right? Which is, would have been an implementation that we've moved off from, but it's interesting that they've done it themselves already, and we've seen a lot of people actually start, participating with them specifically. Right, it's because people do like this idea of like no freeloaders, right? Like that's there's no free lunch, right? There's no free lunch in Bittensor.
Awesome. Let's say 3 years from now, can you define a metric of success from a development standpoint? What can Bittensor do in 3 years from now that it can't do today? That you'd be like, Time well spent.
Yeah, so part of it is, of course, the DTAO thing. That's a major push.
Okay.
Right. It's just about democratizing like the network essentially, right?
Yeah.
There's also the decentralization of the chain nodes, right? That's very important.
Yeah.
Right. You can't have one entity controlling it all, otherwise, they might get shut down, right?
Yeah.
There's also potentially a voting aspect with like different chain upgrades, right? Where we're working out the specifics of doing that.
Yeah.
A lot of it is about integrating it into these GitHub processes that we already have, right? Where people can comment and do pull requests and whatnot, right?
Awesome. Yeah.
I think a big thing is also this idea of validator revenue, right? So right now we have validators get half of the inflation, right? So half of the TAO that's minted goes to them. And that's based on their stake in the network, as well as various factors, including how well they vote on different miners and like how close they are in consensus with everyone else's vote. So basically how fair they are at voting. But it's mainly based on their stake, right? So how much stake you have, and you get a proportion, 50% of what's emitted goes to those people. And those people are getting that. And they also get a commission from all the delegates, right? So those people are getting essentially inflation, and that's funding their validation right now.
Yeah.
Right? But soon we hope to not need that, right? The eventuality I see is that people don't need to worry about that. They will get revenue from having access, right? From being the person who's doing the ranking, miners are incentivized to respond to you because they want your evaluation to be good, right? It's the same way you do well on a test at the end of the year your teacher gives you. You want to do really well on that test because that decides your grade at the end of the year, right? You're doing really well to these validators all the time, and you're constantly responding to them because you want to be in their favor, right?
Yeah.
And with that, you can then serve these commodities to people, right? And effectively you have access to this as a validator, right? You can resell this. You can proxy it the same way Corchell is doing, right?
Sure.
And they should be getting revenue for that, right? And instead of relying on inflation for this, which carries other issues like people doing rakebacks where they like take some amount of the commission that everybody else is getting and they give it back, right, to the delegators, right, to attract more delegation, things like that, different collusions, different, adulterizations of the network protocol. Instead of doing that, they have to rely on this revenue, right, which means they have to actually be a team building a product and getting use out of the network.
They need a business.
They need a business, right?
Yeah.
They need to drive revenue to the network, right? They need to make it useful, right? And I think when we get to that, we can turn off that inflation towards them, right?
Absolutely.
And if you want access to TAO as a validator, you have to pay for it out of the revenue you're getting, right?
Of course. Awesome stuff. Hey, this was an awesome education. I really appreciate you coming, stopping by to the show and telling us all about it.
Yeah, thanks.
We'll see you at the next meetup, eh?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Cool. Thanks, Mike.